Auspicious blessings to all. Last week, we discussed how Buddhist practice entails the threefold training in morality, meditation, and wisdom, which addresses the three corresponding levels of the mind. That is, the coarse manifestations, the physical and verbal acts, the middle manifestations of active mental states, and latent or subconscious tendencies, which is the finest level of the mind. We also learned that morality is usually seen as the entry point into the threefold trainings, since our actions and speech are easily identified and addressed. This week, we will continue by giving treatment to the meaning of morality and how it plays out in our lives. The Brahmajala Sutra reminds us that all practice stems from faith and all virtue is rooted in it. Let's take this tree analogy to better understand the function of faith in relation to morality. In this sense, faith would be seen as the seed, for it is faith that provides us the initial impulse in which the training is taken up, and faith again nourishes the training throughout every single phase of its development. So virtue would be the roots of the tree, for it is virtue that gives grounding to our spiritual endeavors, just as the roots give grounding to a tree. Concentration would be the trunk of the tree, the symbol of strength, non-vacillation, and stability. And wisdom would be seen as the branches which yield the flowers and fruits of enlightenment and deliverance. The vigor of the spiritual life is just like the vigor of a tree. It depends upon healthy roots. And just as a tree with weak and shallow roots cannot flourish and will one day be toppled over, and the growth of this tree is stunted and leading to a withered and barren tree, so too is the spiritual life, devoid of strong roots. And this is a very important point to remember as we engage in the practice of morality. So, for us to be able to scale to the higher stages of spiritual practice, it is first of all important for us to make sure that the roots of our tree are firm. And this translates to having a firm grounding in morality, or in other words, the Sanskrit word shila, which means the different factors of moral virtue. This morality is none other than the basis of effective meditation, which in turn gives rise to wisdom. So we can see from the outset the importance of virtue. So just like a skilled gardener brings a sapling to growth by first tending to the roots of the tree, so too does the earnest seeker of enlightenment begin his or her cultivation by tending to the roots of his or her practice, and that is morality or virtue. In coming to understand what Shila is, there are three different levels of meaning. The first one being samadhana, meaning harmony or coordination. And what this usually means is we all have what we call a Buddha nature. So everyone already is innately pure and compassionate and virtuous and so forth. It is only because of these delusions that we are swayed into the wrong path. And this whole cyclic happening of wrong views, wrong actions, wrong volitions leading to the karma or the seeds of unwholesomeness replanting in itself. This whole process of repetition of unwholesomeness is actually something which goes against this harmony of this innate purity and wisdom. So when we talk about inner virtue, we're talking about this Buddha nature, which is inherently pure. And in order to maintain this harmony of this inner virtue, it means that our actions, our volitions need to be in accordance to such inner virtue. And anything that goes against this sense of inner virtue creates disharmony. So let's take this example of our conscience and what lying, like saying untrue things, how it impacts on our consciousness, how it affects our consciousness. So we know that whenever we lie, it's very difficult to keep a straight face, first of all. And then when we lie, we need to be able to maintain this lie. And we have to worry about who we lied to, so that whenever we meet this person in the future, we make sure that the story remains true to that person. So we keep lying and lying. And then we need to lie again to back up our previous lies. And this continuous cycle of lying creates a big shock to our conscience. It has a very deep and impactful effect on our conscience. And because of this, we're unable to maintain harmony. So this is a very direct example of how if we go against morality externally through body and speech, it affects our active mental states. And likewise, these active mental states will bring discord or harmony depending on what type of actions we take. So this inner virtue is something which is already there. We just need to stay true to it. We just need to return to this inner virtue. At the next level, we have virtuous actions of the mind and speech and body. So what it means is anything that we naturally engage in, inspired by inner virtue, is called virtuous actions. So consider when we see the suffering of animals and people, we very naturally give rise to a sense of compassion. And any action that follows such instinct is considered virtuous actions. But unfortunately, the scope of virtuous actions is quite limited because a lot of what we do is inspired by unwholesome volitions. So what we do here is we try to bring the mental states to a point where we have more wholesomeness and less unwholesomeness. So everything that we do is inspired by wholesomeness. And when that is achieved, then of course we can be said to have engaged in virtuous actions. So we can see that there are many different levels of what we consider morality or shila. The third level of shila actually relates to the rules of conduct. So as for the rules of conduct, we are talking about the intentional behavioral discipline that one takes on oneself due to being informed of the benefits of doing so. So it also means virtues, ethics, and especially those ethics according to one's commitment to the path towards liberation. And of course, the Sanskrit word shila is closely tied to the word shamadana, which means coordination and harmony. And this relates again to inner virtue, as we have mentioned before. So let's take an analogy to highlight the importance of seeing the three levels of shila as interconnected. There is a bodhisattva, or someone who has vowed to liberate sentient beings by the name of Manjushri. And that when the Buddha asked Manjushri, why do people churn milk? Then he explained that people churn milk because they understand that butter is present therein. And why do not people churn water? Because that substance is not present there. So what this means is we all have a Buddha nature, and knowing that we have the potentiality to return to the innate purity already innate in all sentient beings, we know that by engaging our actions of body and speech in line with the virtues of the inner self, then we can really bring to life and bring this potential of purity in all aspects to of our lives. So this is the reason why Manjushri reminds us that yes, it is important to practice shila because there is a potentiality to better one's life. So likewise, Manjushri also maintains that people maintaining moral discipline engage in the holy life because of the existence of the Tathagata Garbha, which is the Buddha that is already within. The spirit behind Shila at all levels is compassion and non-violation, and serves as the ethical compass within self and relationships with others. And it is not really this understanding of morality in terms of obedience, a sense of obligation and external constraint. So we know that the basis of all morality is none other than this lack of wanting to harm sentient beings, this spirit of non-harming, or avimsha in the correct Sanskrit term. And the very first precept, very interestingly enough, before all the other sets of precepts were established by the Buddha, was protection of sentient beings, or non-harm, in a more prescriptive manner. So from this we see that compassion is very important. So how do we understand the importance of non-harm that underlies all the different kinds of precepts that we have? Okay, let's take the example or the hypothetical situation of having cultural differences. Although it is not illegal not to be sensitive to culture, we know that it'll have a big impact if we are desensitized to culture and act upon it and then bring upon suffering to others. So, for example, in New Zealand, in the Maori culture, a taboo to touch the head of children because the head is sacred. But if we do not know this, and then we are misinformed and we act out on our instincts, then of course we are creating disharmony between self and others. And although it's not illegal, but we know that it's going to bring a lot of suffering to the person we are acting upon based on our ignorance of cultural differences. So this means that based on this spirit of non-harm, everything in life that we do is based on the idea that we try to refrain from bringing suffering to others in what kind of form it happens in. Okay? But this doesn't mean that we should not have precepts and just base our life on non-harm, because there are a lot of details about life that unfortunately we're not informed about. So the Buddha, because of this, had come about with a set of precepts, or many sets of precepts, according to our situation, so that we can have clear guidelines for life to lead us towards inner purity. So this session, we will focus on the rules of conduct, mainly focusing on how the physical and verbal regulation prevents immoral impulses from happening. And then we will talk about the proscriptive and prescriptive aspects of Shila, and also address the different sets of precepts in light of our different levels of aspiration on the path of Buddhist practice. And finally, we will discuss the 5 precepts in more detail in relation to how it guides our lives towards freedom and peace in the here and now and into the future. We already understand that volitions influence the way we react to the world physically and verbally. Similarly, just as volitions manifest itself outwardly in an action or speech, so too the avoidance and performance of certain actions. We already understand that volitions influence the way we react to the world physically and verbally. Similarly, just as volitions manifest itself outwards in action and speech, so too does avoidance and performance of certain actions recoil upon the mind and modify the mind's disposition. If mental states dominated by unwholesome mental roots of greed and anger can lead to acts of killing, stealing, lying, and so forth, so too then can abstinence from killing, stealing, and lying, and so forth, while embracing virtue, can lead to a wholesome mental disposition towards kindness, contentment, honesty, and truthfulness. This is because volition translates external actions into either inner purity or inner disharmony, depending on the nature of this volition and action. The moment we consciously refrain from unwholesome actions and speech inspired by the unwholesome roots of greed and anger, the mindfulness that arises as we address such roots, as well as the recollection of the precepts and virtues, are in themselves wholesome mental states. And these mental states are in accord with the inner purity of our Buddha nature. On the other hand, if we are heedless and act and speak inspired by unwholesome roots, then our minds will be in disharmony and our primordial inner purity of the Buddha nature will be out of whack, because it itself is pure, it is immovable. But because our active mental states are against it, then disharmony is formed within. From a scientific point of view, we need to fake it till we make it. A social psychologist from Harvard Buddhist School by the name of Amy Cuddy talked about how adopting a dominant stance may affect our body chemistry. In her study, she had participants stand for 2 minutes in either a power posture with chest lifted and elevated, with head nice and straight and arms propped on the hips. And then she had another group have a meeker stance, so to have a hunched back, to have arms crossed, and to be in a more reticent and passive stance. So in people who held positions of power, the stress hormone cortisol was lower, and testosterone, the hormone associated with dominance and confidence, was greater. So we can see from here that our non-verbals determine how we think and feel about ourselves. Our thoughts are influenced by our bodies. From this, we understand that regulation of body and speech works in a very similar manner as it affects our mental state of mind. So we can see the very clear relationship between science and the way precepts work on our minds. In terms of rules of conduct or precepts, there are two main values, proscriptive and prescriptive. So in short, you could say that these are the do's and don'ts of Buddhist practice. So with prescriptive, we're talking about right performance, what we should do. And this in Sanskrit is charita. It's constructive, it's constraining to goodness. So the proscriptive, on the other hand, refers to precepts that talk about right avoidance, or varita in Sanskrit, restraining from evil. From here we see that precepts are not just what we should not do, but what we should actively do to bring about the desired mental states and to bring about the desired results of Buddhist practice. In order to better understand the relationship between the proscriptive and prescriptive aspects of the precepts, let's take the analogy of weeds in a lawn. I'm sure we can all relate to it. As long as we don't weed the lawn for a while, we know that all different types of weeds will come about, and when they start growing, and if we do not tend to it, then of course our lawn will be ruined by the weeds. And likewise in life, positive practice, wholesome practice is just like maintaining the lawn, and the weeds represent unwholesome behavior, which comes about because of unchecked behavior. So what we essentially have to do as a Buddhist practitioner is to identify those unwholesome actions that we engage in and employ guidelines in life to lead away from these weeds. So these guidelines not only stop us from allowing weeds to grow even more, but we need to one by one weed the lawn until it's completely free of lawn. But then when the lawn is completely weeded, you'll have many patches of bare soil where there's no lawn. So what we have to do is replace these weeds with more lawn, with new lawn. And this is just like not only refraining from what we should not do, but actively engaging in what we should do to make sure that our Buddhist practice is holistic and wholesome. So from this we see that Buddhism is not just about what we should not do. Okay, it's not just prohibitive. It's a very active and proactive way of dealing with life, in the sense that we're trying to make this lawn of ours nice and lush and wholesome. And this also translates to living life fully and engaging in all aspects of it, so that we can bring about benefit not only to ourselves, but to all the people around us. So this brings us further to discuss the differences of the way we see precepts. So natural precepts are those precepts which actually prevent one from engaging in actions or speech which is fundamentally harmful, not only for ourselves but for others. So these include actions of killings, stealing, lying, sexual misconduct, and so forth. But preclusive means that which prevents wrongdoing. So it is not itself unwholesome, but by keeping in line with preclusive precepts, we are preventing ourselves from engaging in things or allowing people to give rise to doubt or suspicion. So it's more like a preventative measure and not so much the prevention of a direct unwholesome deed. So this brings us to a story back in the time of the Buddha. So we know that during the time of the Buddha, everyone went on alms rounds, they begged for food. And so we had a very creative monk by the name of Dayin, who actually wanted to differ from all other monks. So let's imagine that there is this procession of stately looking monks and nuns walking in a straight line throughout the village, receiving food and giving the Dharma to those who are offering food to the Sangha. And everyone maintains a dignified state of expression as they walk and as they give the Dharma. And then here you go, you have a very interesting fellow here who wants to be different from others. So where people were walking nicely and steadily and with a dignified manner, Dayin decided to run. So he was running to collect his alms. And to be honest, running is not harmful for both or other, for self or others, but it does have its consequences in terms of the image that people are giving to others. So as a monk, someone is meant to be calm, compassionate, and someone who can be relied on for spiritual guidance. So here you have this monk who's running for alms. And upon hearing the complaints of others, the Buddha instilled a rule that when monks go on alms processions, they are not allowed to run. And Dayin, being a very cheeky monk, he the next day started hopping on his alms procession, and the next day crawling and so forth. So we see that a lot of the precepts that have come about and have been formulated are to prevent suspicion or doubt or people being offended. But it's not essentially harmful for self or other. It's just more to do with prevention. So this example of this monk doing things different from others and causing a lot of distaste on the part of the people who are donating food or offering food to the Sangha, we have rules against such behavior. So these are preclusive precepts. And then we also have the 5 precepts. And then we have right speech, action, and livelihood from the 8-fold Noble Path and the Buddha-Dharma precepts. So whereas the 5 precepts are more proscriptive precepts, the Buddha-Dharma precepts, and that in relation to the 8-fold path, right speech, action, and livelihood, are considered prescriptive, what we should do. So this is just the point that we need to bring out as we look at the different sets of precepts. We also then have lay and monastic precepts. The biggest difference being in our style of practice. So basically our livelihood. So some people aspire towards living a lay life and living in a very Buddhist way of life, but in a lay manner. And then there are people who want to take things further and decide to become monastics so that they can work 24/7 on their Buddhist practice without too many distractions. So the path of liberation in general avoids the two extremes of mortification and sensual indulgence when we're talking about our actions and speech. But then there is also the middle way in terms of our views. Okay, so there is this idea that life is eternal, that the soul is eternal, and it goes from one life to another, and this soul is unchanging. And this is very different from the Buddhist understanding that this consciousness is always changing at every split second, and gives us a lot of hope in life because we can be a very different person 2 seconds from now, for example. On the one hand, there's this eternalism, that this spirit of ours does not change. And on the other hand, we have the materialists who believe that life ends at death. So the middle path between the physical and verbal understandings of life and the mental understandings of life is what really the Buddha was talking about. So the differences in disciples were more to do with the capacities, not so much the teachings. The Buddha wanted to accommodate to all people because equality is a strong thing about Buddhism. So in order to be able to look after those who aspired towards asceticism to the monastic way, then he had particular precepts geared to those kind of people. And then, of course, for those who wanted to live a lay life but still be very Buddhisty, then the Buddha came up with formulations of precepts for householders or people who live lay lives. And this is very compassionate because, in essence, it all comes down to our personal aspirations. And with all precepts that are specific in nature, like the 5 precepts, like some aspects of the Buddha-Dharma precepts, they are what we consider specific precepts. Pratimoksa. Okay? What it means is, prati means towards and moksha means liberation from cyclic existence. So all these guidelines have been well thought over by the Buddha in a way to lead ourselves out of specific delusions which have a big impact on our clarity of mind. So in terms of aspirations, we have people who want to just live life in a way that brings benefit to oneself and to some degree to those around them. So some people take the 3 refuges and they take the 5 precepts to avoid disharmony between self and others and mental disharmony. But then there are people who want to go further and take the Bodhisattva's precepts, which means that we place the welfare of all sentient beings at the same level as our liberation and our welfare. So what it does, it really works on this sense of acknowledging this attachment to the I, removing this harmful attachment to the notion of I, and allowing us to truly live freely and happily. So in terms of a linear scale of 0 to 10, of course, the Bodhisattva precepts allows us to truly be free and happy and joyful due to the way these precepts and the practice of these precepts transforms the mind. And 5 precepts are somewhere in between, working towards that goal of ultimate freedom and joy. So back to the 5 precepts. Let's go through these 5 specific precepts in some detail. Okay, so when we refrain from killing, it means that we're not violating or harming the lives of others. Okay, this is a very important way to nurture our compassion. So what it means is not killing other human beings and not harming animals and not doing anything which hurts others. So even things like, if we take it from a more global perspective, harming others physically is also a type of killing because we're depriving people of the freedom to their life, to their safety of life. And Venerable Master Xing goes on to say that wasting time and squandering resources can also be a type of killing. Okay, let's take the first point here. Wasting time means that we don't make the most of our lives and we live life in a way where we're not improving ourselves. And we know that our life is also life. So when we waste our life in terms of time in a temporal manner, then we're actually violating our own lives. So it's interesting. It's quite motivational for us to live proactively as a Buddhist. And then when we talk about squandering material resources, it makes a lot of sense because let's take the example of food production. We know that not all countries have access to food equally. We're in America, we're very lucky because food is always in abundance and we're never lacking produce. But what happens when we start wasting food? It means that the world can only produce so much food. And for us to waste food, it means that a lot of countries who are not so fortunate will be deprived of their access to food in the long run, in the big picture of things. And then if many countries waste food, then we won't have food to give to those countries who need it. So wasting resources is also a way of killing. It's killing the environment, it's killing resources, it's killing other people's access to resources. So being environmentally friendly and conscious is also a big part of keeping the precepts. And let's talk about refraining from stealing. So what it really means is to not violate the property of others. Okay, it also means that we don't take stationery from our workplace. We don't take pens, envelopes, paper and so forth from our workplace. And when we borrow things from others, we must return it. Otherwise, that is also violating the property of others. Okay, even things which are not so physical, things like fraud, money laundering, blackmail, extortion, all that kind of stuff, that all falls under the precept against stealing. Okay, so it's important that we don't steal because stealing is taking from others in a way that's not lawful and not acceptable by others. In terms of refraining from lying, it kind of means that we do not violate the trust of others. So what this means is we don't say things which are untrue. We say things which are truthful. Okay? It also means that there are lies of omission. Okay, sometimes we don't say something when we should, based on our own vested interest. And there's no need to give examples of this. We do it all the time, but unfortunately, it's not something which allows us to keep a clear conscience. Okay, so lies of omission and lies of commission. Okay, we say things exist when things do not exist, and so forth. Okay? All these things are not so good when it comes to maintaining integrity of self and others. Okay, so another example of lying, which is called a white lie, refers to saying something out of compassion. Okay, so just say you have a friend who is on the deathbed with stage 4 cancer. You're not going to say, okay, if this person is looking very sickly and very unwell, you're not going to say, okay, you look unwell, okay? Although this will be saying the truth, this is truthful speech, but we're not taking into consideration that this is going to hurt this person more mentally. So of course, by saying that, okay, you look like you're in a very good state, you know, keep at it, keep fighting, okay, you're doing well. That would be a lie because that person is not looking well at all. Okay, but this is out of compassion. So we see that when we speak white lies, it is based on compassion. So this is an exception to this particular precept. So basically, we can consider a white lie also a skillful means, a skillful lie. Okay, so it is something that we do with the right intentions. And then the next one is refraining from sexual misconduct. Anything to do with rape, prostitution, polygamy, pedophilia, sexual slavery, adultery, and so forth. All this is sexual misconduct according to Buddhism. We also know that by engaging in sexual misconduct, it's also violating the laws of the country. So as long as we can maintain sexual integrity, then not only are we not bringing harm upon our family, we're not bringing harm to other people's families. Okay, we all know that an affair not only affects one family, it affects two families if both parties are married. And it also affects not just these two people involved, but the children of these people. So a lot of broken families happen because of sexual misconduct. So the Buddha specifically institutionalized or prescribed a rule against sexual misconduct for this matter. And refraining from consuming intoxicants is a preclusive precept, as we have mentioned before, in general terms. Okay, so it means to not undermine our good moral judgment. So what it means is drinking alcohol is in itself not harmful for others or self if it is done in moderation. But if we start abusing alcohol, or if we take drugs which alter our normal state of prudent decision making, then it'll lead to many wrong decisions in life which we regret in the future. Okay, so there is a story of which really illustrates the importance of the fifth precept in relation to the other four. So one day someone comes home from work very tired, and he was looking forward to his pint of beer. So upon sitting down and treating himself to beer, he got carried away and drank too much. So this person became inebriated. And being inebriated, this person started feeling hungry and thought to himself, let me think, what should I have for dinner? So this person goes to the fridge, all drunk and happy and merry, and opens his fridge only to find out that there was nothing in the fridge. So because this person had lost his moral judgment, he thought, okay, let's find the fastest way to find food. Okay, so what he did was, what came to mind is that the neighbor had raised chickens. So this person thought to himself, okay, the fastest way is to go and take a chicken, cook it and have it for dinner. So what did he do? He went next door, stole a chicken while the neighbor was out, came back, killed the chicken and ate it for dinner. And then when the neighbor returned home to find that one of the chickens were missing, being a good neighbor of the lady, this lady thought that she'd come around to this man's house and asked whether he had seen the missing chicken. So upon knocking the door of this person, this drunk man opened the door to see the beautiful neighbor standing outside asking, "Hey, neighbor, have you seen my chicken?" "No, I have not seen any chicken." And this neighbor was quite satisfied with his answer, and just before she left, this man, being drunk and not having his senses together, acted upon his sexual urge and took his neighbor and raped her. So we can see from this story, although it's hypothetical, that one person who becomes inebriated or intoxicated will not have the senses in check, so that it is easy to engage in all the previous four precepts of killing. Okay, he killed the chicken, he stole the chicken, he lied to the neighbor, and he raped the neighbor. So just like this, we can see that with intoxication, it leads to a lot of issues in life. So in regards to the benefits of morality, Venerable Master Xing Yun has expressed that we can eliminate our sufferings, afflictions, and fear in this lifetime and gain the freedom and peace and harmony and joy of body and mind. And in the future life, we can escape from falling into the three lower realms, be born in the realms of humans and heavenly beings, and even become the Buddha. So these really point to why we should be taking the precepts. In terms of the benefits of upholding the five precepts, we can see the non-trespassing of others and self as freedom of self and others in the here and now. So when we do not steal, we're not infringing on people. So that leads to freedom of the right to own things. When we do not kill, we're affording others freedom to their access to life, and we're not trespassing them at the same time. And the same is for lying and sexual misconduct. Okay? So by upholding the 5 precepts, we are actively promoting freedom, not just for self, but for others. And from a deeper level, not killing nurtures our compassion. Okay? It diminishes fear in the world. When everyone does not kill, there's no need to fear. There's no need to wear concealed carry all the time. There's no need to worry about what's going to happen to ourselves. Okay, when we do not lie, we will speak with confidence and we will be able to express ourselves freely, not having to worry about our conscience. And likewise, in terms of other people, we don't need to doubt other people's integrity. So that's freedom in integrity and speech. And when we do not steal, we're providing a sense of security to all, okay? Because people have freedom to their own belongings. And likewise, it works the same way for ourselves. And when we do not engage in sexual misconduct, we are not violating others' rights to integrity, and we're not violating upon other people's families. So just like this, we see that upholding the precepts has immediate benefits of offering freedom for self and other. In terms of future benefits of upholding the precepts, it all comes down to not creating unwholesome karma, which will play out in our future lives. It also means that we are preventing ourselves from creating afflictions because we are maintaining a wholesome mental state, which in turn is in harmony with our inner virtue, with our Buddha nature. And also, by maintaining the precepts continuously, we are working to lessen the effects of this problematic attachment or non-understanding of self and attachment to I. So in the long run, we are actually becoming happier people because our external practice of wholesome deeds in accordance to the precepts actually lead ourselves closer to our inner purity. And likewise, our happiness and our freedom and joy will also increase. In terms of whether we should take the precepts and uphold them, or just be conventionally a good person without upholding the precepts, is a very good question that most people ask. Okay, because the excuse for people not taking precepts is usually, I'm a good person. I didn't kill, I didn't steal, I didn't do all those kind of things. So what is the need for taking precepts? Okay, if we recall the fact that as we take precepts or take refuge, we are planting the seeds of the precept essence in us, inside our minds. And when we very actively and mentally, holistically take the precepts with body, speech, and mind, what we're doing is planting these seeds inside our volition, so that every time we reinforce these volitions of wholesomeness, they will grow within us. And whenever we have momentary lapses in behavior, because there is this habitual tendency to uphold these precepts, then it usually overpowers these negative lapses of our morality. But if we are just good people, we lack this innate seed within us, that seed that we plant as we very actively and consciously plant as we uphold and take the precepts. In terms of taking precepts and breaking them, and not taking precepts and not breaking them, there is a very clear way to see this. Okay, the other reason why most people refrain from taking precepts is because they worry that they will transgress. And they'll think that, okay, if I take the precepts and transgress, that's kind of not good. Okay, but in essence, whether we take the precepts or not doesn't have much difference when it comes to creating karma. So just say we do something nasty like steal. The karma is exactly the same for someone who has taken the precepts as opposed to someone who has not taken the precept. The only difference is, for someone who has not taken the precepts, they have more excuse to keep doing that action over and over again. But when you have planted the seeds of goodness, of refraining from stealing inside your mind, whenever we transgress this particular mode of morality, this rule of conduct, then very naturally, these seeds will come into play and it'll stop us. It'll be like the angel on the left side of our head saying, don't do that, don't do that. It'll lead to a lot of suffering. So at least we have a backdrop to fall back on. Okay, so taking the precepts actually works in a way to strengthen our wholesomeness, and it'll prevent us from engaging in unwholesome deeds. So just like that, to me personally, I think that taking precepts and breaking them is safer than not taking precepts and breaking them. And then when we have taken the precepts, we are more bound to feel repentant for doing the wrong things. So this also adds to the strength of formally taking the precepts. So just think of taking precepts as a way of taking away the knife away from the rubber, so that we're no longer entertaining the mental states of greed, anger, and ignorance as we try to progress in our Buddhist practice. What we have covered so far in this session is an overview of Shila, or morality, as well as the 5 precepts in some detail. But there is a lot more when it comes to the realization of morality. As Venerable Master Xing Yun explains, the only way to bring about the betterment of living beings is to demand that our morals meet standards that are humanistic, life-affirming, and modern. We must establish a humanistic Buddhism which accepts and upholds the precepts of the Bodhisattva, that benefits both ourselves and others, and integrates the Buddhist teachings of the Noble Eightfold Path, 4 means of embracing, and the 6 perfections into the precepts. So what this means is there is so much more when it comes to developing holistic practice and working towards morality at all levels. And these different practices will be discussed during subsequent sessions. Today, during this session, we have discussed how physical and verbal regulation prevents immoral impulses from coming about. And we have also come to understand that there are the proscriptive and prescriptive aspects of Shila, which both lead one to a life of freedom and inner purification as we work to eliminate the unwholesome deeds of body and mind and replace them with wholesome deeds and thoughts. So back to the analogy of the tree mentioned earlier during this session, the rules of conduct may be seen as the soil that nurtures the roots of virtue. During this session, we also talked about the different sets of precepts that address the different levels of aspiration on the Buddhist path of practice. We also discussed the different sets of precepts that address our different levels of aspiration on our path of Buddhist practice, and how it eventually leads to true freedom and joy as we remove the erroneous understandings of I, which is at the most innermost part of the mind. We also discussed how the 5 precepts, in relation to how it guides our lives towards freedom and peace, work, and how each individual precept functions in our daily lives. More practices relating to how one can live in accordance to Shila, such as the Bodhisattva precepts, repentance, and generosity, will be discussed in the following several sessions before we end this semester of our Buddha-Dharma class. In the meantime, I wish you all well. Please stay safe, be happy, and see you next week. Auspicious blessings.